Welcome back. I'm George Mullen, subbing for Steve Malzberg today on the show. This next segment, we're going to go back to our panel discussion with Congressman Peter Hoekstra, who was elected in 1992 to Congress, served there to 2010. He's the former chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. Our other panel guest is my old friend John Gizzi, who's the chief Washington correspondent for Newsmax. Gentlemen, welcome back to the show.
Hey, good to be back with you,
George.
If we can do this, we got another segment after this, as you know. I wouldn't mind sticking to foreign policy a bit here and just get some thoughts, and maybe on the next segment talk about some domestic things and some prognostications on the midterm elections as well. But Congressman, let's start with you. Clapper yesterday during his testimony said the following: "We should be very concerned that Syria has become a magnet for extremists." What are your thoughts on the situation in Syria? Do you think the Obama administration has completely blown it? Should we have been active in there? Should we have given supplies? What do you think we should have done, and what do you think is going to happen?
Well, I think it's very hard to identify what we should have done. Clearly, we needed a strategy. We haven't had a strategy. I think that one of the things that was going on in Benghazi is that we were facilitating arms shipment to certain folks in Syria. After what happened in Libya, I think we found out that, hey, maybe we didn't know who the good guys and the bad guys are. The bottom line on this is we haven't had a strategy for the Middle East that was working at containing the threat from radical jihadists since this president moved into office. His first outreach with Iran, his speech in Cairo, embracing the Arab Spring in Egypt, and then embracing it in Libya. All of those are the root causes as to what we are seeing in Syria today.
If we take it to Iran for a second, what are your thoughts on the deal that was recently struck? Do you think we're the suckers on this end here? And do you think Israel is going to be getting a little agitated here? What do you think is going to happen over the next 6 months?
I mean, I think this has been a great deal for Iran. They've already got access to, foreign capital, their own capital coming back into their country. Once you have reduced and relieved some of the pressure because of sanctions, it's going to be almost impossible to put those back in place. The president says, well, we're going to come back and we're going to reimpose sanctions and tougher sanctions. The bottom line is Iran got a great deal and they didn't have to do anything to get it.
John Gizzi, what are your thoughts on these subjects, and what are you hearing sort of in Washington in your travels? Do they realize, most people in Washington, that this is all just a show foreign policy that is just a disaster at this point in time? What are you hearing?
Certainly, the Republican members of the House of Representatives, particularly some of the newer members, as well as senior members such as Congressman Chris Smith of New Jersey, the longest-serving member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, get the message loud and clear. Don't trust Iran. The White House is going in the direction of easing sanctions. The Republican House members are pushing very strongly for tougher sanctions, and that's going to be on the agenda. Now, the president said during the State of the Union he would veto any tougher measure that came out. In the meantime, the trusting of the regime is a very nebulous area. Mr. Rouhani is hailed as a moderate, and yet he basically is the spokesman for the government. The Ayatollah and the governing council, the Council of Elders, are the ones who hold the power in Tehran. Rouhani essentially is the Iranian version of Jay Carney, a mouthpiece.
Well, let me ask you this, Congressman. When it comes to Afghanistan, the distinguished foreign policy scholar Fred Kagan said this on Fox News the other day. If we get out of Afghanistan, then al-Qaeda will have won. They will present that as a victory. When Obama was running for president, he said, first time, he said this was the good war. Obviously, from information that has come out, particularly from former Secretary of Defense Gates, that he really didn't believe what he said and just is trying to find a way out. Do you think if we pull back, and I know the American people are tired of war, but if we just pull out, do you think there is worse to come? Do you think there will be disaster after disaster if we don't have some sort of presence in the Middle East anymore?
Well, first I want to go back to what John was talking about, sanctions on Iran. That's not only a Republican House thing. There are Democrats in the House and in the Senate who are all pushing for stronger sanctions on Iran rather than relieving them. I think John would agree that's a bipartisan position on foreign policy, is really enforce stricter sanctions on Iran rather than relieving the pressure. If we have no residual troop level in Afghanistan, you will see exactly what you're seeing in Iraq. Iraq were a country that had a greater possibility of success, but when there were no troops left, no partnership with the United States, you're seeing this violence in Iraq, and this country is starting to tear apart. You'll see it even worse in Afghanistan, but there is a worse solution than pulling out of Afghanistan. That really bad solution would be leaving some troops in Afghanistan with terrible rules of engagement, where they wouldn't be able to defend themselves and protect themselves. If we're going to leave a residual force in Afghanistan, make sure that they've got rigorous rules of engagement so that they can protect themselves. That would be something new for Afghanistan. For the last 3 years, the rules of engagement, and even some of the years under the Bush administration, for our troops didn't enable them to do what they needed to do to win that war.
Well, I agree. If you're going to leave a force there and they're only going to be there to protect themselves, then what's the sense of having them there at all?
Absolutely.
I agree with that. John Gizzi, what are your thoughts?
I'm with Robert Gates on this, and 2 weeks ago when I spoke to former Secretary Gates at a press breakfast here in Washington, he said it might be wise to just let the next decisions on Afghanistan cool off a bit until their next presidential election. President Karzai, in Mr. Gates's word, is the most difficult U.S. ally since de Gaulle, and it might well be wise to see who succeeds him and what direction the next president of Afghanistan chooses to go.
All right, very good. Gentlemen, I want to thank you very much. Congressman Peter Hoekstra, John Gizzi of Newsmax. You'll be coming back for another segment. I hope to be talking about the midterm elections and some domestic things with you, so put your thinking caps on for that. We'll see you in about an hour. Thanks so much, gentlemen. We'll see you then.
Looking forward to it.
Great, thank you.
Coming up on the next segment, I am going to be talking to editorial board member and columnist for the Wall Street Journal, James Taranto. He's a very distinguished writer and thinker, and we'll be talking about some of the tax situations that are going on in Washington with 501c3s. I'm George Marlin, filing in for Steve Malzberg on Newsmax TV. See you soon.
The Steve Malzberg